Welcome to the April 3rd edition of the PFF Forecast. Eric, at this very moment, live betting against my Lakers' last playoff chances / hopes and dreams, which is probably a good bet because they suck. We're going to continue our win totals discussions. Got three great conferences, divisions to talk about today. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to hit the NFC West, the AFC North, and the NFC South. And rumor has it that Eric's ready to bet the USFL. So we'll talk about that. And at the end, recommendations. And I've got some Masters thoughts before the tournament starts on Thursday. Let's rock. The Lakers are up 8. Can you tell me why you have no faith in them?
Well, LeBron's not playing. Russell Westbrook is pretty bad. Nikola Jokic is probably the best player in the NBA right now. I don't know. Is that disputable? What is that a bad take?
Saying Nikola Jokic is the best player in the NBA, in my opinion, is a very bad take.
So what? So what's the problem with that?
He's okay. I don't want to sound ridiculous, but I think putting him top 5 would be kind. Would be more in line with what he deserves. Like, I think it's just absolutely ridiculous to say that you would rather have. The way I think about it is like, who would you rather have in a game if you had to take one player? And the idea that you would rather have Nikola Jokic over Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Giannis, Joel Embiid. I don't know if I'm missing anyone there, but to me, that's ridiculous.
Well, it was interesting because I was listening and I was listening to a podcast with Seth Partnow, who wrote a book that was a recommendation station book for us a couple of weeks ago. And he was talking about how, and I kind of like this because I think he painted it, and maybe I said it wrong. I think he's playing the best of any player in the NBA right now, but like
that's
part now was sort of, what's that?
I said I think that's also false, but okay.
Okay, well I don't follow the NBA.
Maybe at the time of his podcast he was more in line. I do. There was a big shift in NBA MVP odds because he had played well of late. That is true. So I digress. So,
but like, and I have actually our interns Tej and Arjun working on this right now. But Seth, and it's a lot easier in the NBA. Seth used to work for the Milwaukee Bucks. I think he left before they won a championship. But you can, there's a fair amount of like, I think, credibility there given what they have built. And he was saying that when he tries to evaluate, he has a different he weighs playoffs more heavily. So, in the playoffs, like there's a certain, and we talk about this like a little bit in football where, with Baker Mayfield, right? Like everybody wanted to get rid of Baker Mayfield. But like when you think about it, that Browns team went from 1-31 in 2 years before him to 30-30 in the games that he played the last 4 years, right? So like by all measurements, that's a successful draft pick. But like I think one of the reasons they moved on was because it's very clear he can't compete with the top guys, especially at the price. And I think in the NBA, there's obviously like guys that like I think of like, this is bad because this is like my Timberwolves, growing up a Timberwolves fan. But like, remember like Michael James, who like put up 20 and 5.
Yeah, of course.
And he's like terrible, right? But like there's like a certain like caliber of player that can put up 20 and 5 on a shitty team for 82 games, but like he gets in the playoffs and he's terrible. Like if he ever got to the playoffs, there's no chance, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like a player like Kevin Durant, obviously Curry, LeBron, the truly elite guys, game transcends sort of, situation. Mm-hmm. And I think like that's like where the Jokic thing is like, I'm imagining that in the playoffs, maybe his brand of basketball might not translate, but I could be wrong. And why the Nuggets haven't necessarily made the runs.
Last year in the playoffs, he averaged 30, 12, and 5 on 50% shooting, 38% shooting from 3. So he played well last year. The reason, I don't know. I think that
wasn't he the first player in NBA history to be averaging what he's averaging now? Like, was it like 30, 10, and 8 or something like that, or 25, 10, and 8?
I think it's 26, 13, and 8 right now. Look, he's a top 5 player. I think it's also the Nuggets are in like 6th place. So, and obviously they don't have Jamal Murray. Anyways, this is what you tuned in for, which is basketball talk. By the way, your fade of the Lakers is smart because like Anthony Davis was having his foot checked out within 5 minutes of the game starting.
I bet plus 3.5 first half Nuggets and plus 1.5 first half Nuggets. They're currently down by 4 entering the second. So I feel like I'm in a good spot.
I think you're going to be all right. I'd bet them right now to win the game as well. Okay, let's start off with this. We're going to talk about win totals, but before we do, the USFL season is fast upon us. And while I am thinking about betting Formula One and the Masters and the NBA playoffs, you are thinking about betting the USFL. How are you thinking about betting the USFL?
No, I think that we've had people when we were sort of the season was over and we asked for some hey, what do people want? There was a fair amount of people that said like, hey, we want to know like what a process would be like to create a model. And not everybody who listens to the show is going to have this sort of ability to do, machine learning or, build a power ranking or whatever. So I think these like new leagues or leagues that like the CFL was one where I had a lot of fun last year because it had restarted, right? And so a lot of the building of the priors is going to be easier than, let's say, building a prior for the NFL season. And actually, like, here's a tip, by the way, if you're going to go into the 2022 season, building a prior for the 2022 NFL season is going to be, it depends upon how you look at it. It's harder if you're a traditional modeler, and it's easier if you're not, because, there's so much quarterback change, there's so much coaching change, there's so much non-stationarity in the league, that what we've done with our simulation so far, with the numbers we're going to talk about this a little bit later, are leaning on the market in an intelligent way more than we're leaning on our own fundamentals, because again, a lot of those fundamentals go out the window when you have so much turnover. Mm-hmm. And when you have a league that's either starting or a league that's starting over, in the case of the CFL, it was starting over. But when you have a league that's starting anew, the biggest thing, and this is what we're going to talk about today, is building a good prior. And so, we at PFF, we have obviously like player grades and stuff for, sort of who the players playing in the USFL are. But the one thing we're going to lean on is what I would consider to be like sort of circular reasoning, which is FanDuel. You go to FanDuel, depending upon where you are, you can go to DraftKings too. I have not seen them as ubiquitous on DraftKings, but you can go to FanDuel and look at the odds to win the USFL title. Those vary from plus 450 to plus 700. There's not a ton of variance there. And I would not advise you to bet any of them. I would advise you to use them to build a power ranking. And there's a few different ways you can do that. One of them is you can literally just take the implied probabilities, right? So, plus 450 is just, like an 18.2% chance, break even to win it all, right? Plus 700 is 12.5, right? So you could take the differences in those two, and you can literally just like build a power ranking, whether that be ELO, whether that be whatever, and basically like guess about what each team should be against the spread. I would advise you that if you do that, you should wait until the first set of numbers comes out for the first game and see how close your guesses end up being. The cool thing about the USFL, George, I don't know if you're going to come with me, because it's in Birmingham. Every single game is in Birmingham. So there's no home field advantage, right? So you don't even have to think about home field advantage.
First off, I didn't know that. And now that I know that, the chances of me going to a USFL game have have gone
pretty
down
low, right?
shockingly.
Yeah,
It's amazing because if you had been like, hey man, do you want to go to a USFL game? And then you were like, there's one in Tampa Bay. I'd be like, yeah man, let's go do it. You'd be like, there's one in San Diego. I'd be like, yeah, let's go do it. There's one in Mexico. Yeah, let's go do it. Birmingham. You know what? That's going to be a tough weekend for me.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm sick again. So, and there are some games that are played on Friday, some games that are played on Saturday. So there is some rest differential you have to build in, right? So if one team's coming off of playing a Friday versus one team coming off playing a Saturday, but for the most part, like the spot related things like travel and stuff like that are all pretty straightforward, right? So that's helpful. So if you build a power ranking and it's not immediately reflected in what you're working with, like you did it wrong, right? Now, if you are somebody who has more of like an R, Python simulation background, and this is what Ben Brown and I have done, is you can take, and we also have we have opinions about the quarterbacks, right? So they drafted one round of quarterbacks and then they drafted another round of quarterbacks. One of the quarterbacks actually is already retired because he's injured. But there's like that aspect of it. There's head coaches. So like Jeff Fisher versus my alma mater's former coach, Mike Riley. So like, what do you have there? There's also like the rest of the roster, which like that might take some time for you to fish through, whatever. You can put all those together. And then if you have like an initial, and this is what we did, you have an initial idea of what the power rankings are. It's a 10-week season. There's only 2 rounds of playoffs. Tiebreakers are pretty freaking simple. You build a simulation model and you see how close your odds of winning the title are to the markets, right? And if your odds are way off, then where do you have to start for your issue? You have to start at your very beginning for how much you're tethering your power rankings, right? And so that's kind of the iterative process we went through, which was look at the odds to win the title, assume those are correct, right? That's obviously a big assumption. Have your power rankings, use those power rankings as the seed to try to re-engineer those probabilities. And if you're wrong, find out where you're wrong, make corrections, or take a stand. If you think that those probabilities are wrong, then your numbers are right, then go with your numbers. Then if you have numbers that basically reproduce the simulation results that the bookmakers are pointing out to you, then you probably have a pretty good idea of how much better each team is than the other teams in the league. And then you can use those little power rankings. So let's say you say, Michigan is, -2 and Philadelphia is +2. Then if Philadelphia is playing Michigan, then the spread's going to be 4. And if it's not 4, then you have a betting opportunity. And, from my perspective, there's 40 games in the league. There's one futures market. You much rather bow to the futures market right now and have 40 opportunities possibly to bet on the league versus having one opportunity now and sort of sitting out those 40 opportunities. So that's kind of how we've done it. There are various entry points that you can get at, but to me, that's how I would do it, or that's how I have done it for different leagues. And so far, AAF, XFL, USFL, I haven't had more success in these leagues, let's be honest, in making it to the final round. But that's the way that I would take the betting market odds and sort of use them against the league, especially for leagues that are either starting anew, have had a huge shakeup, or if you're just starting out a new league, like let's say you want to bet F1, and you don't have data, that's another good way to sort of seed an algorithm, and then you have to sort of find a way to update your numbers week in and week out based upon what's happened.
What explains in your mind the difference between if you use something like the current odds to win the Super Bowl as your seed, and then you look at week 1 and you're like, oh wow, there's a lot of opportunities for me to bet. Are you worried about that? Or are you like, no, this makes sense because there's a lot of other crap that's going into these lines that's just complete baloney, and I'm going to bet against them?
Yeah, and actually there's a great tweet. I'm glad that you asked this question, because there was a great tweet by Sharp Clark NFL, who was looking at the bet and it was looking at the MGM odds for two AFC North teams, the Ravens and the Bengals, which I think are pretty popular given the uncertainty of the Deshaun Watson situation with the suspension, which should happen and everything.
But by the way, Denver now winning the game.
Yeah, you hate to see it. So, and our friend Clark here says the odds at MGM don't add up. The Baltimore Ravens are minus 130 to make the playoffs, but they're minus 125 to go over 9.5 wins. So just a little bit of a brief. So minus 130 is 56.5% break even. Minus 125 is 55.5%. So there's like a 1% difference there. Whereas if you look at the Bengals are minus 135 to make the playoffs. So minus 135 puts you at 57.4, but they are only minus 110 to go over 9.5 wins. And so Clark is looking at this. He's saying there's something that doesn't add up, right? The Ravens are more likely to go over 9.5 wins, but the Bengals are more likely to make the playoffs. And he's like, well, what's the issue there? And I'll tell you what the issue is. And whether or not you believe it's a big enough issue is whether or not you should bet it, right? And this is to the point of your question, which is what happens when the season-long stuff doesn't add up to the week one stuff? And it's almost all entirely related to like the situational stuff, which, by the way, is not that big of a deal in USFL. The Bengals, when they introduced the 17th game into the NFL schedule, they introduced a game that does not factor into common opponents in almost all cases, right? So the 17th game is basically a different divisional opponent depending upon where you finished in a previous year. Yep. The Ravens get the Giants. The Bengals get the Cowboys, right? So the Bengals could lose a game to the Cowboys that doesn't affect their tiebreakers at all, right? So it makes them go more likely to go under 10, right? But still make the playoffs should they win 9 games, right?
Yep.
The Ravens play the Giants. It's a game that they could win, right? But still miss out on tiebreakers given the results of all their other games, right? Now the question becomes, and I think Clark, responded to the tweet I had, was basically like, is it that big of a difference? I mean, you're talking about like 1%, right? 2%. So the question becomes, is that a big enough difference? And does the house edge affect it that much? But like, that's where I would say is like, if you're off by like 3-4%, like 2 or 3 points in the betting market, depending upon where you are on the landscape of points, then there's probably something fundamental to your process that's wrong. If you're a couple percentage points off, it's either you or the book are not taking into consideration something like rest differential. Interdivisional games, for example, will have closer point spreads because of familiarity, things like that. All stuff, by the way, that makes it easier to bet leagues that are nascent, right? Because they don't have those things embedded into them. And why it makes the NFL harder, because all those things are baked into the number.
It reminds me of a quote. And so I'll just say this. All betting lines are wrong. Some are useful.
Exploitable.
Yeah. Right. It's like, trust your process to like, that's part of it. I mean, I would advise you not to be wagering things that you can't afford. Right. But I would say, if you are taking on a process of betting something using a model, do your due diligence. If you are off from the market, make sure you understand why, right? There could be an injury or there could be some piece of information that you do not have. But also, part of it is just doing, and so nothing will incentivize you to look carefully and improve your modeling than will finding out that your numbers were not as good as the markets and having to, improve over time. So don't let the first week be the only week that you can afford to bet, would be my first piece of advice. Make sure that you can kind of bet throughout that season. And it's a really cool way to, to improve and innovate and kind of see how you can create a process that you could use in other sports and be successful at. Before we go on to the win totals, a reminder that right now, 25% off on any PFF subscription with promo code FORECAST, FORECAST. Right now, Get an Edge subscription, gets you all of PFF's locked article content. There's a lot of it, and it's all very good. The NFL Draft Guide, 2022 free agency rankings, data, grades, and more for the 2021 season. So head to pff.com, get yourself an Edge subscription, and if you're a bettor, get an Elite subscription. That includes all of what's in Edge, plus all of the betting tools for the entirety of the NFL and college football season, player props, sides, totals, the whole deal. And that can be yours for 25% off. All right, we're going to try and do,
by the way, are showing life.
You know,
they've opened it up a little bit.
When you look at the screen and you see Russell Westbrook celebrating like he's done something good, that's a rare sight.
Yeah,
we're gonna try for 3 divisions. We're gonna see how much time it takes, and it's a long off season too. So don't worry. Let's start with the NFC West though, and let's start with the team that is certainly trying to win least of all, and that's the Seattle Seahawks. The Seattle Seahawks right now, Jeremy Fowler is reporting that that DK Metcalf is available for the right price. Basically, the only shred of usefulness left on the Seattle Seahawks. And so it seems rather fair that their current win total on DraftKings Sportsbook is 6, juiced to the under, -120, under 6, +100, over 6. Your thoughts on this line?
Yeah, I mean, we make it 6.3. I don't think you can't really pay me to bet the over. I think that the only ingredient for them doing well is there's this aspect of Pete Carroll that is, very good at getting a lot out of bad players, weirdly. I remember looking back and actually looking at the Tavares Jackson year. Their win total was 6. He got 7 wins out of Tavares Jackson. And sort of for context, because we really don't have a lot him post Wilson. But this is one where I'd probably lay off. If anything, I'd have to go over because of the numbers and the NFC is really bad, and they are sitting in a good spot, being the last place team in the NFC West. But I think other than that, it's really like a stay away sort of situation for me with my own money.
The fact that DK Metcalf is potentially on the block tells you that this is a tank situation, right? That's what that means. And so, gosh, I know it's juiced to the under, and I think there's reason there. People are looking at other teams out there. I mean, you look at we talked about the Jets the last time. We're going to talk about the Panthers here in a second. The Panthers also with a win total of 6, and the Seahawks are in a situation where they are also playing in one of the best divisions in the NFL. So as you look at some of the other bad teams out there, it's not like the AFC East is not a good division, but it's probably not quite, right? And I guess, the Dolphins did improve here a little bit, but they're still playing Tua. Mac Jones is in his second year, and like the Seahawks have a path to getting the number 1 pick next year, and certainly winning fewer than 6 games. I don't think I'm betting it though. And if push came to shove, I would probably take the under if I absolutely had to. But this is not one that I particularly want to bet. If you had to take one side, which side would you take?
Probably over, but just because, I think the NFC is really weak. It's going to be hard for me to take an under on an NFC team. Other than maybe like the Cardinals or the Vikings or some team that's maybe a little overrated. But even then, like, I don't think that it's just hard for me to see a lot of losses in the NFC because it's just going to be a bunch of teams beating up on each other. Plus, I believe the NFC has 9 home games this year. That's another thing to think about.
That's true. That'll really help the Seahawks. They have a great home field advantage. Drew Lock's going to be great there. Who do you think their quarterback is this year?
I want to say it's like, so I want to say it's Kenny Pickett, or Malik Willis. But I just don't have any faith that they believe that position is important enough to invest in with a high pick.
Yeah, I still think it's going to be Desmond Ridder, and I don't think they take him at 9. But
so you think Ritter's going top of second round?
Yeah,
a lot of you included, but a lot of really smart people like Ridder, and that means something to me.
I have heard from a lot of people who watch very carefully college quarterbacks really like Ridder. Our grading really likes Ridder. The his mobility, the fact that he did run a somewhat pro scheme at Cincinnati, like I think there's a lot of things that go in his favor that will help him, and that the Seahawks will go, let's take a shot here. If he stinks, then we have a terrible team and we'll get a top pick next year. Arizona Cardinals.
My biggest concern with Ridder is the one time we got to see him play kind of a defense full of NFL caliber athletes, like he looked really slow. Like not slow running, but the processing. Like when he faced Alabama, like how many passes got batted down, and like how many there were just the windows weren't as big, and I get worried about that. That being said, I mean every single quarterback in this draft has problems.
Yeah. I mean, at least you saw him play. I mean, he played really well against the Notre Dame team. Obviously, the rest of his teammates also had not seen anyone like Alabama. So take that into consideration.
Yep, that's the Zach Wilson thing too, right? Like Zach Wilson and Malik Willis too. Malik Willis is playing against bad players and he's playing with bad players. That's a good point. We spent too much time on the Seahawks. Let's go to the Cardinals, the formerly St. Louis Cardinals.
I like where your head's at. Win total of 9, even on both sides, minus 110. And they do, I think, know who their quarterback is going to be this year. That would be Kyler Murray. How are you thinking about the Cardinals? Over, under 9?
I would go. We make it 8.8. I have seen some markets where it's 8.5. I think under 9 is the only way you can go here. You know, the last season they had a lot of close games. They had a lot of like weird games where they won with a backup quarterback. What was it? Their first they had like 5 games on the road where they won as underdogs outright. Mm-hmm. So there's some noisiness there that you want to fade. So I go under here. I think the 49ers and the Rams are too good. And Murray has some drive success issues. I know we've been looking a little bit at it. Instead of expected points, we've looked at something we've called like essentially expected drive points, which takes out. So sequencing, I think, is overvalued by like coaches and football people, but I think it's underrated by people like us. So like Murray, I think, is maybe a good EPA guy, but not necessarily a great like expected drive points added guy, like where it's hard for him to string consecutive great plays together, even though he's really good at explosive plays. So that would be me. And maybe that's Kingsbury. Maybe Kingsbury literally can't call consecutive great plays, and Murray bails him out of stuff. But like that offense in general, and Kingsbury's their guy, right? Like there's no qualms about it now that they've got all the extensions and stuff. So that would be my take.
Yeah, it's interesting because he had a great grade from a clean pocket this past year. He improved his passing over the middle of the field, which we talked about a ton being a huge issue for him. So he improved, Murray did a lot last year in areas that he had to improve. And he's done that each and every single year. And I wonder if that, continues to happen. Because if it does, and maybe the injuries and that stuff is like, that's something that we have to expect to happen. But the injuries last year were really unfortunate, right? Not only did Murray get injured, but also DeAndre Hopkins got injured, right?
Yep.
And I mean, if they win 8 games this year, does Cliff Kingsbury have a job with the Cardinals?
No. Well, yeah, he does because he has the extension, right? Like,
I mean,
he has the extension.
Sure. It all sounds nice when it starts. If they win 8 games this year, and that means that they finish in 3rd in this division, behind a Niners team that is either playing Trey Lance or Jimmy Garoppolo and the ghost of of James passed. I don't know, man.
Garoppolo was in a commercial the other day. I can't remember exactly what it was
It's a Subway
but it was
commercial.
kind of like, what's that?
It's a Subway commercial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully his life goes better than the last guy whose name started with a J that had a Subway commercial.
They have a lot of athletes in the new Subway commercials. Their marketing spend must be ridiculous. And honestly, the fact that Jimmy G is in there, I think, says that his career is pointing up. Like every other athlete in that commercial, in Subway commercials, is a superstar. Like it's Simone Biles, Steph Curry, Charles Barkley, Tom Brady, and Jimmy G. Yeah. So I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. So would you say that Kyler Murray regresses next year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say so. Like, what do you think?
I think 9. I think 9 is the right number. If I knew who the Niners were playing at quarterback, it would help me. If it was Trey Lance, I think I'm going 9 over 9 because there's just a huge advantage. Kyler Murray is a huge advantage in those games. And I don't have a ton of faith in Trey Lance. And it'll be interesting to see when they get to play the Niners, when they get to play the Seahawks. But look, I think Kyler Murray was a top 7 graded quarterback last year, struggled with injury at the end of the year, and had no DeAndre Hopkins at the end of the year. And those things matter. And so if you look at how he played over the course of the season, the second half of the season was worse. And everyone says, oh, that's because Cliff Kingsbury sucks at the second half of the season. And I would say maybe, but maybe it's also a confluence of things that came together and made it tough for them to win. And so I push comes to shove, I would actually go over here.
Gotcha. Your Lakers, by the way, plucky. This first half is a sweat.
It's really going to come down to the wire for you here.
It really is going to come down to the wire. So, okay.
We go down.
Would you be surprised? Would you be surprised to know that our projections have the Niners and the Rams within 0.3 of a win?
And this is with Trey Lance at quarterback, I assume.
This is the Trey area, yeah. This is some blend. I mean, like we're using the market too a little bit to try to pull down our priors a little bit to, yeah.
So the Niners are at 10. Over is -115. Under is -105. I will start with this one. Just as I went over with the Cardinals as kind of a fade of the Niners, I'm going to go under 10. And look, if they win 11 games next year with Trey Lance, that means Trey Lance will have played really darn well. And people will say that and they go, what do you mean? Jimmy G, has gone over that number and has not been that great. But Jimmy G gets that offense. Trey Lance could be a dynamic player and not totally get that offense and not be accurate enough in some of the shorter throws. And that could that could really create some growing pains. So I'm leaning under there, not just because of the price. If Trey Lance starts the whole season and they win 9 games and, squeak into the playoffs as a wild card, like that to me would be super successful. They definitely played above expectation last year, especially down, towards the end of the season. And that to me is why this number is 10 instead of 9.5 or 9.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm inclined. I mean, the Niners are one where don't you think that like alts are probably, the place to go in sort of thinking about the 49ers because they're a team that essentially, I mean, like you saw the graph where I had like weeks being elite, weeks being poor, and they're like the only team on like the interior of that graph because they're like the only team, like they either go to the NFC title game or they win 10 or they lose 10 games or more. I mean, is this a thing that where it goes like completely pear-shaped for them and you're happy you got an alt under at a plus price, or or is this like a is this a situation where like you think they can actually sort of have a season where they play sort of to their median? I mean, actually, like last year, right? Last year they actually played to their median. Interestingly, right? Like their win total was 10.5 going into the year. They went 10. It kind of like. Do you think that they're a median team, or do you think that they're a team that presses edges and like does a good job of sort of like I think that they're like a tail team, right? Especially kind of how they play football, right?
I tend to agree. And the reason, look, if Trey Lance, I'm operating under the impression that Trey Lance is starting every single game. If Trey Lance is starting and it's not going well throwing the football, which it did not last year when he played, then that means that they're running a lot. And everyone was very terrified of Trey Lance and Shanahan's run scheme. And I think I would be as well if he can figure out how to throw the ball. If not, then they're just going to be in these like grinded out games. And, they went and picked up Charvarius Ward. That's nice. They definitely needed some support there in the secondary. They have a really nice defensive line. They have Fred Warner, who's fantastic, one of the best linebackers in the NFL. By the way, this is it's tied 59-59 with 7 seconds to go. Russell Westbrook sprints down for a dunk with 2.9. Lakers up 2 with 2.9 seconds to go. I'm going to split these
bets. It looks like I have plus 3.5 first half and plus 1.5 first half.
Yeah, that's what happened. So I
bet more on 3.5. So I'm a hashtag winner right now, but we'll see.
Yeah, I agree with you on the alt lines. And look, our simulation has them winning 9.8 games, and there are plenty of ways where this can go over. I don't know, man. Both the Cardinals and the Niners ending up with 9 wins doesn't surprise me in the slightest, and both one of them winning 13 also wouldn't totally surprise me, right? Kyler Murray having an MVP type season is something that I could see, probably a little bit more so than Trey Lance having that. It'd be interesting to see.
Interesting.
Yeah, shocker. It'd be interesting to see what they end up getting if they get something for Jimmy G, because you talk about a rookie quarterback and having that extra cap space afforded to you in that situation. That really isn't happening for the Niners this year, right? And that
first 2 years.
Yeah, sure. But that's something to take into account, right? It's like, oh, they have this rookie quarterback, and so the rest of their team's going to be really strong. Not quite.
Yeah, no, and not only that, but the cap space is less meaningful now than it was a month ago.
Certainly.
And and the caps, the edge with a rookie quarterback is less meaningful too when you trade away as many draft picks as they did to get the pick to begin with, right? Like the cost of Trey Lance is more than the cost of a traditional first round quarterback.
Sir.
Like that's another issue with it. I mean, this is one
of
those
situations. The Nuggets are shooting free throws with 0.8 of a second left in this game.
Oh,
and have tied the game. Will Barton has a free throw to give the Nuggets the lead.
Oh.
And he hits it in a just this is the summation of the Lakers season, which is fouling a guy.
You don't really follow you follow me on Twitter, but you don't really follow my Twitter. Yesterday, halfway through the game,
I do follow you on Twitter. Hold on. What you are saying is that I don't see everything you tweet out. I'm not sure that you're aware of how Twitter works. But they don't. When I log into Twitter, they don't just show me everything that you've tweeted.
The good ones should show up. I tweeted out, Villanova under 65.5 live, and I don't know if you remember the end of that game, but it landed 65, and it was 65 with like 90 seconds left, and it was like they put the backups in. There were a bunch of bricks. The one kid like had an open lane and dribbled it off his leg out of bounds. And everybody was like, you bastard. And I'm like, hey, it was never a doubt, This one was never in doubt.
Yeah, man. Yesterday's college games do cost me a lot of money.
Villanova's first 5 minutes were worse than what we're going to put up tonight in rec league.
Was pretty special. Yeah. The LA Rams, 10.5, over -115, under is -105. Defending champions, they lose Von Miller. They won't have OBJ. They picked up Allen Robinson, and they gave out a lot of extensions to their Super Bowl winning players and coaches. What do you think?
Yeah, they have the 5th highest odds to win the Super Bowl. I think that's where the market is too, after Buffalo, Tampa Bay, Green Bay, and then Kansas City. We give the Rams an 8% chance to win the Super Bowl. We put it at 10.1. The Rams have made me change the way I think about things, obviously. The Bobby Wagner signing is interesting because that was always a team where one of the sharp things they did was not invest in inside linebacker. And even though the contract is not 5 years, $50 million, it's not cheap either, for that position for them. So I don't think you can go over here, but I'm not going to spend my own money betting under the Rams with McVay and as many superstars as they have, and probably, the edge that they continue to have with, nutrition and things like that. Here's a question I have for you, because do you think Kevin O'Connell is a loss for that team?
I do not. Think that's one of the benefits of having a guy like Sean McVay, right? Is that it's not a huge loss. He's grooming a bunch of guys. He's the one that's in there working his behind off to make sure that they've got an offensive system that is going to put up points and support the quarterback. What 10.5 is tough. I am tempted to go over here. And one of the reasons I'm tempted to go over is, they didn't have Robert Woods last year. They then pick up OBJ. And the way that OBJ came in to that team, and even though he played well, but I thought that system really magnified all of the good things that he did. And I think that's going to happen with Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson has been really, really, really good. Last year, it was a complete joke in Chicago. That offense had no idea what it was doing. Matt Nagy was, it was a complete joke. This is the same thing, except with a better receiver, right? And the potential to have both him and Cooper Kupp there with Matt Stafford, I think makes a ton of sense. I think it's a nice pickup. It's a nice way to invest in Matt Stafford continuing to be good. My one worry is the offensive line, right? And they were so good last year, and whether they can continue to be really good is my one concern, because that's where we've seen that offense break down, right? Whether it be with Jared Goff or with Matt Stafford. So I have a hard. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of concerning things I would say. Like, I don't think any of us believe that Cooper Kupp is going to get any worse or Matthew Stafford is going to get any worse. There are reasonable things in Stafford's career where you could say, he's always been on his best behavior in the first part of a career with somebody, right? And maybe that, because we saw him, in the middle part of the season, he had a grade of 52, 62, 58.8. Then he got better, right? So maybe he already had his swan, his swan dive, and then came back. But and again, so we don't necessarily know. Every other instance of him getting a new coordinator and being great was with Detroit. So that's a thing. When he was blitzed last year, he completed 76% of his passes, 9.2 yards per attempt, 16 touchdowns, 1 interception. What did teams do to Patrick Mahomes once they figured out that this was the case?
Yeah, they didn't blitz him at all.
They didn't blitz him at all, right? So you take 178 dropbacks, and so it's not even that big of a percentage, but when you look at, so that's 23%, 22% of his dropbacks. Patrick Mahomes last year against the blitz, let's look at those splits for a real quick second here. 15% of his dropbacks were against the blitz. So you're going to take 7% of his dropbacks essentially and change them into a situation that he hasn't performed quite as favorably in. That, again, and I don't know if this is the case, but if I were defenses, you spend all of last offseason essentially trying to engineer yourself to stop Kansas City, stop Buffalo. Are they going to try to engineer themselves to stop the Rams? Because they have done that before, right? The 2018, they all took the book out of Patricia weirdly and stopped them, and then McVay had to pivot and they had to get a new quarterback. That's what I'm concerned with. I don't think that these guys are going to get fundamentally worse, but I think that the league might be the offense that the league spends its hours catching up to this year.
I don't think that's going to be the case. Interestingly, and that may be a huge advantage for them. What's so funny is that if you go back and you look at their season and you remember that Bucs game, and that game was that game was crazy, right? And if Todd Bowles, now the head coach of the Tampa Bay Bucs, if he just doesn't blitz on the last play of the second last play of regulation, the Bucs are in the Super Bowl, and maybe they win, and maybe Brady is actually retired now. The blitz, not realizing that the one thing that he did better than anyone else last year was throw against the blitz, really has set this next season up in a very, very, very different way. And 22%. It's not like he was blitzed an absolute crap ton. But I would expect that at the very least that stat has got around, if for no other reason than that play. If that play doesn't happen, I'm not sure as many defensive coordinators know that Matt Stafford kills the blitz. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I do think it'll be interesting to look at this season. What I found fascinating about Stafford, and this is why, look, McVay hasn't quite figured out the fourth down stuff, but his offense highlighted everything that Matthew Stafford did well. I mean, Matthew Stafford's PFF grade last year was right in line with every one of his best seasons in Detroit. In fact, it was slightly lower than each of his previous two seasons in Detroit. The offensive system made so much more of what he was able to do. The blitz numbers are a great example of that. And we need to hats off to Sean McVay for that. That needs to be something that we talk about Shanahan with this all the time. That is something that we have to acknowledge Sean McVay for doing, because it's super freaking impressive. That offense was really dynamic last year in ways that it wasn't quite with Jared Goff. Not the blitz stuff, not necessarily as much, but I think some of the downfield. I mean, you look at Matthew Stafford last year throwing downfield, and I don't have Jared Goff's numbers in front of me at this exact moment, but when he threw downfield, where is this here? 40% of his throws, 20 plus yards downfield, were a big time throw.
Yeah.
NFL average is 29%. By the way, getting these numbers from the PFF quarterback annual, which you get with a PFF subscription. So
think about this. In 2020 against the blitz, Jared Goff. So this was with the Rams, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jared Goff, 33% of his passes were against the blitz. So even then, you've already seen the decline. Yeah. People are sort of catching on. Goff was 66% completion, 6.7 yards per attempt, 10 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So the outcomes were fine. Mm-hmm. Not great though. 5 big time throws, 6 turnover worthy plays. Not blitzed was bad though. 7.4 yards per attempt, 12 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 14 turnover worthy plays when not blitzed. Again, I was one of those people who said, okay, once you put the quarterback through the production function of Sean McVay, how much different are they? The answer is pretty big. Ultimately. Mm-hmm. And the big part is Stafford just absolutely fillets you when there's a blitz, and Goff moderately hurts you when he gets the ball off.
I actually think that's a really good way of characterizing the output of the function. So like Sean McVay, clearly one of the things that he was able to do really well is to give the quarterback an opportunity to take advantage of those situations, right?
Yeah.
And Matthew Stafford did, and Jared Goff did not. And that is where you see that dramatic difference come through. You look at Jared Goff, by the way, and I thought this was kind of interesting as well. Jared Goff, the last season, responsible for 22 of his own pressures, and that it wasn't quite half as much by Stafford. I thought that is interesting, the kind of awareness in the pocket as well, something that Stafford improved upon. And then the result of that is, well, I'm able to hit guys downfield, that are open, and Jared Goff wasn't quite.
Do you think, so the Rams, I think, again, have taught us a lot of lessons. They've also, I think, made the public aware of a lot of things we've been preaching, which one of them is high-end wide receiver play is more valuable than high-end offensive line play because of what you just said, where in situations where you are not expected to block somebody, they can get open in enough time for your quarterback to not only survive but thrive, right? That's what Cooper Kupp represents, and also how important secondary wide receiver play is, right? When Robert Woods went down, they immediately go and get Odell Beckham, and for a while the offense struggled or was not quite as good because he was sort of factoring in, and they were going with Skoranek and stuff like that. Not Justin Jefferson, but Vance Jefferson. And in the Super Bowl, when Odell went down, that offense stopped to a crawl. Other than the last drive, right? And so I think that underscores how important the Allen Robinson, acquisition is. If Allen Robinson is as good as, and we look at how open does he get against single coverage? You look at, Matt Harmon, I think, does pretty good work with, reception perception. How open does he get if you look at all the routes and that kind of thing? I think it paints a better picture of Allen Robinson than his production was last year. But if Allen Robinson's production last year is a sign of things to come, then that is the leak for the Rams, right? Because if he goes out and catches 32 balls for 480 yards and a couple touchdowns, this offense is sunk, right?
Yeah. Do you want? I'll take the over.
Okay, so you think he'll come back and have a good year? I sort of agree.
Oh.
You're talking about a guy with two ACL. Well, not two ACLs, one ACL, right? And then last year, look, the Bears. I don't know if we quite captured, and this might get to I kind of like the Bears a little bit more every single day. I don't think we quite captured how bad the Bears coaching was last year.
Terrible. I actually think the fact that Allen Robinson had 32 receptions is capturing it really, really well. Last year, and I think this is the perfect thing. This was a great addition for the Rams because they literally did it the year before. They're like, okay, Matthew Stafford's over here suffering in Detroit. Allen Robinson's over here suffering in another NFC North team. And we're going to go grab him. We're going to bring him in. We're going to put him in offense. The other thing about Allen Robinson is he's not going to be the only person on the team worth even covering, which was exactly what he was in Chicago that entire time. And that was with an uninspired offense. So, yeah, I don't think that will be the leak at all. I actually think that the Rams are in a better position to win this division by a pretty large margin this year than they were last year. And I just don't think that's debatable, even without Von Miller back. That quarterbacks have dramatically decreased in the opposition they face, and there are more question marks with every team in their division than there were last year. Period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one is it's so interesting, right? I mean, I think we're all looking at the Cardinals like they're not a 11-win team, and I think that's fair. By the way, the Cardinals were a loss. What was it? Were they at home? They were at home. A home loss against a 7-win Seattle team away from winning this division, right? Because the,
Yep.
the Niners came back from 17 on the Rams.
Yep.
And the Cardinals had the division, like, and granted, would that have been a 4 or 5 game still? So they probably still would have played the Rams. The Rams kicked their ass the next week, so whatever.
Yep.
But like, it's so crazy how we look at this Rams team, and I think like a lot of us have generated a decent amount of respect for them, but how tenuous it was, right? Here's a question I was going to ask when you were talking about the throw to Cooper Kupp against the Bucks.
Mm-hmm.
If the Bucks win that game, how do we view the Rams 2021 season?
This is a good question. And I think the answer is as a pretty big failure, because that game would have then been punctuated by a cataclysmic collapse, right? In that, it's so fascinating. That would have been such a different, because not only do we now view them as a team that had the will, the ability to withstand that from Tom Brady on the road and then make that play to win the game, but they also were down 10 to the Bengals at home in the Super Bowl and go back and win that game when it looked dead in the water. So the flip on that is, I mean, it's close to 180 as possible. I'll tell you this. I'd be pretty confident that you and I would have proclaimed in a Rams-splaining segment that that it was the wrong thing to do by the Rams. And I really do wonder how differently people would be acting this offseason based on that one play, right? Like, you could legitimately make the case that one play has changed the way so many teams are acting this season. It probably changes the Tom Brady thing because they go beat the Bengals and he rides off into the sunset back to back.
Yeah, they beat the Niners at home, right? Like, there's no way they don't, and they beat the Bengals. They find a way. I mean, Jaquiski Tartt catches that interception.
True. Don't please. It's no gimme. It's no gimme. Tom Brady versus Jimmy G would have been incredible. Yeah. No gimme.
And also, the other one is, the Bengals got an interception right after the T. Higgins touchdown, and they settled for a field goal, and they never scored again. Mm-hmm. There were a number. And look, I think to come back and give the Rams some credit, okay? That is why you acquired Stafford, right? You acquired Stafford because you believed that when all the chips were in the middle of the table, he could be a quarterback that comes from behind, and beat that. Look, do you think for a second that if you gave up a 24-point lead to the Bucs, Jared Goff is answering?
There's no shot.
Do you think that Jared Goff is coming from behind?
I'll tell you this: if they give up that, it's not Jared Goff. It's John Wolford's in there at that point.
Do you think so? Again, I'll say this and people have called me out for this, and I said, look, the Rams were under 500 against the spread. It was a very strange thing. I don't think the way the Rams have built their team is prescriptive for anybody else, right? You give me Aaron Donald on another team, and then maybe, right? You give me Sean McVay, then maybe. But, for them, again, I can see it now. And the point is you brought in Stafford to be that because you believe that at price he was worth it because he could be a quarterback to dig you out. And he did dig you out a number of times. And that's kind of that's the one leak, I think, that I don't think we believe that Stafford could dig a team out of those issues that were going to come up. And they did come up.
Well, and what's interesting is, we sat here and we talked about how, he'd never had a PFF grade over, I think it's 85. He didn't last season. And what we underestimated was the outcome that you can get still with that level of performance that clearly McVay and team understood and were confident in. And in the biggest of moments, it came through. But it is a really good point, man, that that one play, Todd Bowles calls a slightly better defensive call there. And this is such a different conversation. Yeah. It really, really is.
And as somebody, I'm going to bring this back.
Is Sean McVay doing, Thursday Night Football if that happens? Right?
If Jaquiski Tartt catches that interception, man, I still think.
Clearly I've blacked that out of my mind because.
Or, like I said, if Seattle if the Cardinals beat the Seahawks in Week 18 and win that division, they're not
No,
even a division winner.
yeah, but the Rams are beating them by 30. That was always happening.
Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? Like this, and again, as somebody who cheers for the Niners, who I think have done something, I think they've done a lot of things the right way. As somebody who's rooting for the Chiefs to win more Super Bowls, I am happy that other teams are looking at the Rams and saying, "Oh, we're the next Rams." It's like, no, you're not. You're not the next Rams. The Rams are the only Rams.
It's a very good point. That's an astute point. Before we get to recommendations here, another astute point that I will make is that I've been telling people this, and now it's April, and if you haven't been listening and you're hairy and prickly, and it's it's not going to be good for you. So this is this is one of your last chances. Okay, the weather is heating up. Go to Manscaped and get yourself ready to go for the summer with the Performance Package 4.0 that includes the Lawnmower 4.0, which I use. I used it yesterday. Still works like an absolute dream. Use promo code PFF. Get 20% off plus free shipping. It also comes with a nose and ear hair trimmer. Don't be the guy that from afar it looks, oh yeah, good looking guy, and then he gets up close and it's like, yeah, I can see the hair in his ear, in his nose. Not a good look. Also want to make sure, yeah, it's not good. The performance package includes 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner, body wash, and includes the opportunity to keep yourself smelling good after you shower as well with a moisturizer. So go to manscaped.com, use promo code PFF, get 20% off and free shipping at Manscaped. I use it. We use it. We wouldn't support it if we don't. So make yourself look a little bit better this summer. Okay. Recommendations. Want to go first?
Yeah. Let me. I have a book that I've been reading that has been pretty tantalizing and frustrating. It is called The Antisocial Network by Ben Mesrich. It is about basically like everybody and anybody who participated in the GameStop fiasco that happened last year.
Oh wow!
It's pretty interesting. Yeah, I think it's been fun. I'm almost finished with it. I think other people would like it too.
That sounds interesting. It's actually something I might go read. I have a recommendation here. The Masters is coming up on Thursday. Okay, so I'm preparing. I made an initial round of bets. If you remember, Scotty Scheffler was amongst those, if I remember correctly. He is now the number one player in the world. He is 12-1 to win outright. Do not bet him now. Now is not the time. Okay, you've missed your shot at this point. Current odds to win the Masters: John Rahm is plus 850, Scotty Scheffler 12-1, Cameron Smith 14-1, Justin Thomas 14-1, Dustin Johnson, Rory 16-1. That I'm saying all this to say that there aren't a whole lot of clear-cut favorites. Okay, so look a little bit further down the list here. Brooks is still 18-1. That's where I got him at earlier. It looks increasingly promising that Tiger is going to play. Tiger is 40-1. It should be 40-1 for him to finish the tournament. However, I am placing you're going to hate this so much. I'm placing a good karma bet. I'm placing a unit or 2 or 3 on Tiger Woods at 40-1. Not because I think that's a good price, but because if something miraculous happens and I decided not to bet on it, I am going to be absolutely devastated. I bet on him the last time he won. It was an amazing feeling. It was the coolest feeling in the entire world. So he's 40-1. That's a terrible price. It's 7-1 to go top 5. It is 3 plus 330 to go top 10. I actually do have a bet that I think is smart from a monetary perspective. And here's the thing about the Masters. It's the same course every freaking time. It's also a course that really favors left-handed players pretty dramatically. You can go look at players that have won, one of whom is Bubba Watson.
Oh.
And Bubba Watson is 70-1. He is 11-1 to go top 5 and 5-1 to go top 10. I like all 3. I'm going to bet all 3. They've made some changes to a couple of holes. With what I can tell, I read through the changes. I believe it's 11 and 15. I might be getting those wrong, but I read through what the changes are. And my takeaway from that is those changes were aimed at making it harder for right-handed players. And that means that a lefty like Bubba Watson, I think, is going to have it's not going to affect him super negatively. So that's my recommendation right now.
Oh.
I think that he will be a fairly popular pick amongst people once they start betting on the Masters this week. And so that's mine right now. I'm going to do a little more research here, make sure I get a few more bets in before things start on Thursday, and I'll talk about them on Wednesday. But that's what I've got.
Look, the people accusing our podcast of being too lefty, they're getting a W today. Very good, very good. I don't think I'm going to bet the golf unless you tell me exactly what to bet. But at the same time, I do like your whole like, hey, I'll pay to see it happen type of thing. See in your case, you're just making sure that like you don't miss out, right? Which
look,
this is the world we live in, you know.
I am going. Tiger plays. First off, someone had a really good quote. It was like, if Tiger plays, it was some guy talking to some other tour player, and he said, if Tiger plays, you could play naked and no one would notice. And that's 100% true. If Tiger plays, that's the only person anyone's going to be watching. So you might as well have a bet there. And if you're betting on him to be bad, then your life just sucks. I'm sorry.
You might as well
life
just
stinks.
go. Yeah, go.
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully this gets out beforehand. 8:00 Eastern tonight.
Okay.
Lay the points with South Carolina women's basketball. Everybody's going to buy. Everybody's going to bet UConn.
What's the spread?
4.5, depending upon where you go. I think everybody's going to bet UConn because of the history, Gino, and whatever. But they have that, like, they've choked this game away a number of times in the last few years. I also think, again, this is my favorite. Like, I've looked at all the touts on Twitter, and they all like UConn, and the numbers only getting more towards UConn. More towards South Carolina. Go South Carolina.
Yeah. So South Carolina has this woman, Aaliyah Boston. She's the player of the year. I have a hard time seeing anyone at UConn stopping her.
Yeah.
The tough thing is that UConn has these two guards that are amazing, and Paige Beckers is insane. So going against Paige Buckets is tough, especially it's in her hometown. But your fade the touts when the number doesn't move is so good. So you've convinced me. I'm going to go bet on South Carolina right now. I believe it tips at like 9:00, something like that.
8 or so.
But you have to go bet on Bubba with me too.
Okay.
Is that
I will.
fair?
I'm seeing 4.5 now, -200 money line. South Carolina, the same school that produced Asia Wilson, who's a WNBA MVP. So this is they are not a Cinderella. They are a legit college basketball program now.
They're the number one team in the country.
So take it.
There it is. That's our podcast. We'll see you guys on Wednesday. Be well. Peace.